The United States has halted negotiations with Canada over a critical water sharing agreement, the Columbia River Treaty, at a time when President Donald Trump is intensifying his rhetoric against Canada. Welcome viewers to my channel. Please subscribe, like my video and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next update. His threats have ranged from floating the idea of annexing America's northern neighbor to pledging to dismantle long-standing treaties that form the backbone of bilateral relations. According to British Columbia's Ministry of Energy, American officials are currently conducting a broad review of the Columbia River Treaty. This agreement, which has been in effect for more than 6 decades, regulates transboundary water management, including flood prevention, hydroelectric power generation, and water supply allocation. The Columbia River, one of North America's greatest river systems, begins high in the Rocky Mountain headwaters of southeastern British Columbia and flows southward across the U.S. border, eventually emptying into the Pacific Ocean at the Oregon-Washington state line. Stretching for roughly 1,200 miles, about 1,900 kilometers, the river's watershed is vast and powerful. Its enormous flows account for approximately 40% of America's total hydroelectric output, while also supplying nearly half of British Columbia's hydropower capacity. The treaty itself was born from crisis. In 1948, devastating floods overwhelmed communities along the river, obliterating Oregon's second-largest city, Vanport, and causing extensive destruction in southern British Columbia. The disaster underscored the urgent need for coordinated management of the river system. By 1964, Canada and the United States formalized the Columbia River Treaty, creating a framework that has since shaped water governance across the region. Under the terms of the deal, Canada built and operates a network of major dams that regulate water flow, thereby preventing flooding in U.S. territory and ensuring a consistent supply of water for American hydroelectric stations. In return, British Columbia receives financial compensation for its role in flood control, an arrangement worth about $200 million United States dollars, $288 million annually. Additionally, the U.S. is required to share half of the extra hydroelectric capacity generated by the dams, with Canada selling that share on the open market. The treaty has been renegotiated several times in recent decades, as changing energy demands, environmental priorities, and indigenous rights have come to the forefront. In July 2023, during Joe Biden's presidency, both countries announced they had reached an agreement in principle on a modernized version of the treaty, just ahead of the looming September 2024 expiration of the original pact. Despite months of diplomatic urgency, however, final details were never locked in. Instead, the two nations settled on a temporary 3-year extension to keep the arrangement functioning while negotiations continued. That momentum has now stalled. With Trump's return to power, the White House has shifted toward an adversarial posture. In recent weeks, Trump has openly mocked Canada's sovereignty, calling its border imaginary, and threatening to impose historic financial devastation if Ottawa resists his demands. He has also hinted that he may tear apart multiple bilateral agreements, including water-sharing compacts like the Columbia River Treaty. Water has been a recurring theme in Trump's rhetoric. During his campaign last year, he drew attention to what he described as the large faucet in British Columbia, suggesting it could be turned on to quench drought-stricken California, a comment widely interpreted as a reference to the Columbia River. Critics have since warned that Trump's framing of Canada's natural resources as tools for U.S. domestic policy reveals a willingness to politicize and destabilize cross-border cooperation. One of the long-standing criticisms of the Columbia River Treaty is its exclusion of Indigenous voices. When the pact was drafted in the 1960s, neither Canadian First Nations nor U.S. tribes, despite living along and depending on the river for centuries, were consulted. The Columbia River flows through vast swaths of unceded Indigenous territory, and its regulation has disrupted salmon migration routes, degraded ecosystems, and harmed cultural traditions deeply tied to the watershed. Advocates had hoped that modernizing the treaty would mark a turning point by formally recognizing Indigenous rights and prioritizing the restoration of endangered salmon habitats. At present, however, the future of the agreement remains in limbo. While either Canada or the U.S. has the legal right to terminate the treaty, doing so requires a formal 10-year advance notice. This provision provides some breathing room but also prolongs uncertainty for communities and industries that rely on stable water sharing rules. In response to the pause, British Columbia's Energy Minister, Adrian Dix, announced that the provincial government will host a series of public information sessions later this month. These sessions aim to explain the treaty's implications to residents and prepare them for potential disruptions should U.S. hostility continue. Dix emphasized that British Columbia will remain resolute, vowing, "We're going to fight, everywhere, including in these negotiations, even in the face of mounting pressure from Washington." The Columbia River Treaty has long been hailed as one of the most successful examples of cross-border cooperation between Canada and the United States. Its suspension now represents more than just a dispute over water. It has become symbolic of the fragility of bilateral relations in an era of political volatility, economic uncertainty, and environmental strain. Few rivers on Earth command the kind of respect, awe, and dependence that the Columbia River inspires. To truly grasp why the Columbia River Treaty matters, one must first understand the river itself, not just as a geographical feature, but as a living force that has shaped landscapes, economies, cultures, and politics for centuries. The Columbia begins humbly in the wetlands near Columbia Lake in southeastern British Columbia, nestled amid the rugged peaks of the Canadian Rockies. At first, it seems almost modest, a meandering stream that winds through valleys carved by glaciers thousands of years ago. Yet, as it gathers tributaries and snowmelt, the river grows in power and size, becoming a force of nature that would eventually carve its path through mountains, plateaus, and canyons, before pouring into the Pacific Ocean. Its journey spans some 1,200 miles, or about 1,900 kilometers, making it the fourth largest river in North America by volume. But size alone does not capture its significance. The Columbia drains a watershed of more than 258,000 square miles, 668,000 square kilometers, an area larger than France. This basin spans multiple U.S. states, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, and a large portion of British Columbia. The river and its tributaries provide water for agriculture, drinking, industry, and hydropower across this vast region. Historically, the Columbia's power was both a blessing and a curse. Its spring freshets, driven by snowmelt from the Rockies and Cascades, could transform the river into a raging torrent. Entire communities living along its banks learned to live with the cycle of abundance and destruction, rich soils for farming on one hand, devastating floods on the other. The flood of 1948, which destroyed Vanport, Oregon's second largest city at the time, stands as a grim reminder of the river's untamed potential. Nearly 20,000 people were left homeless overnight. Yet the river was also bountiful beyond measure. Before the age of dams, the Columbia was the greatest salmon river on Earth. Each year, tens of millions of salmon surged upstream from the Pacific to spawn in tributaries stretching deep into British Columbia, Idaho, and even Nevada. For indigenous peoples, this cycle was the foundation of life itself. Salmon was not only food but also culture, economy, and spirituality. Ceremonies marked the first salmon runs of the year, and communities organized their lives around the harvest. The fish nourished not only humans but also bears, eagles, and forests, an entire web of life dependent on the river's seasonal abundance. European settlers who arrived in the 19th century saw the Columbia through different eyes. To them, it was a resource to be harnessed, a highway into the continent's interior, and a barrier to be crossed. The river played a central role in the fur trade, the expansion of railroads, and the establishment of towns and cities across the Pacific Northwest. Its vast hydropower potential was recognized early, but it was not until the New Deal era of the 1930s that the U.S. began to fully exploit it. The construction of the Bonneville Dam, 1938, and Grand Coulee Dam, 1942, marked a turning point. These massive projects provided jobs during the Great Depression, powered wartime industries, and transformed the Pacific Northwest into one of the most electrified regions in the world. But they also choked off salmon runs, flooded indigenous lands, and permanently altered the ecology of the river. Canada followed suit with its own hydroelectric projects, though on a smaller scale at first. By the mid-20th century, it became clear that the Columbia was not a river that could be managed piecemeal. What happened upstream in British Columbia had direct consequences downstream in Portland, Seattle, and beyond. Floods, water shortages, and electricity demands crossed borders. A binational solution was needed. That solution became the Columbia River Treaty. But the treaty did not emerge from thin air, it grew out of a recognition that the river had become too important too powerful, and too interdependent to be governed by anything less than international